My name is Carl Bernister, and I am a professor of art history and aesthetics at Stanford University. I'm also the author of the novel Fistfighting on Canvas, Picasso and Braque. My interest in Georges Braque is based on a variety of factors. First, he has consistently played second fiddle to Picasso for a variety of reasons, but in my opinion, Braque is the more accomplished of the two, at least in terms of expressing a Cubist philosophy. I'm also greatly intrigued by the criticism of Braque, and specifically about his lack of engagement in the politics and events surrounding World War II. And I think that even plays a role in his inferior status in relation to Picasso. But I think my biggest interest in Braque is his unparalleled mastery of the still life, and in particular, what drove him to pursue that mastery. So I'm glad that contemporary scholarship is really starting to give Braque more of his due. So the interesting thing about Braque and Picasso involves a story about a holiday that the two of them took to the north coast of France during the wintertime. And this was just before World War II had started. A group of friends decided to take this kind of bohemian holiday, and along with them was this wealthy daughter of a factory owner and patron of Georges Braque's named Marie Morin. She was someone who greatly identified with Braque. They were very close friends, but not in a romantic way. He had mostly a paternal relationship with her. Now, over the course of the holidays, she becomes really infatuated with Picasso, despite Braque's suggestions to avoid him. And, again, this is a classic bohemian holiday. So there's alcohol and music and dancing and sex. And there's even some suggestions later on that hallucinogens may have been involved. But there's really little evidence to support that because it's such a juicy art history gossip, it pops up here and there in the scholarship. Late one evening, Marie and Picasso wind up having a heated argument, and a drunken Picasso comes back inside and goes back into his room and passes out. The next day, Marie's frozen body is discovered outside, and it's unclear whether she committed suicide or whether this was just an accident. And Picasso is really shaken by this, but ultimately brushes off the incident. However, Braque is really disturbed to the core. This is a man who is, in essence, introverted and really highly controlled. And so this experience really takes the wind out of his sails. But, being who he is, he's never going to admit it. What is interesting about this event is that it leads into World War II. And when World War II happens, this is the greatest conflict in human history. And Braque essentially sits it out in his studio in Paris. And he takes a lot of flack for this in terms of the scholarship and in terms of, whether or not he should have been more active in the French resistance or those kinds of things. But he really almost literally holds himself up painting still lifes in his studio. And he really takes a lot of pains to distance himself, particularly his art, from the political realities of the day. This is World War II. Again, it's a huge conflict in human history, and he spends it in his apartment painting what are essentially cold abstractions of still lifes. So the question is, what drives someone to do this? What puts them in this position? And when you look at some of his paintings, that's part of the answer. I mean, this is really where he develops the control and mastery over composition and in particular texture. And the control and the delicate balances that he strikes during this time are really stunning and, quite frankly, overshadow anything that Picasso does in this time period and really afterwards. So, at the same time, he's fixated on kind of breathing some sort of pallid life into these listless still life arrangements, and so that's part of the answer. But the other part really comes from a journal, a relatively obscure journal of Braque's that includes a letter written to Picasso, but it's not a letter that he ever sends, and it's, as far as we can tell, not one that Picasso ever reads. But when you read through it, I think you get a sense of what Braque was going through. I may not know your face, but I know that you are near. You've been hiding in plain sight, disguising yourself
among the things we left behind. You're not a subtle presence, but we taught ourselves to be blind. We were young. We wanted to live hard enough, full enough lives so worth living they would never end, and we should never know you. We knew that one day you would come, but we harbored the hope that we could escape, outrun you. Among friends, we were brave. If the thought of you grew to be too much, we were always ready with a trick or a gesture to remind us of our youth, to shake off your cold stare. We distracted ourselves with drink and song. We laughed loud enough to not hear you knocking at our door. In time, we could no longer ignore the faceless stranger waiting outside. We tried to name you, give you a face, and when you eluded us still, we mocked you. But you still came. We were brash to think we could escape, but some of us did. We were left behind to float about like ships lost at sea. That is when we began to truly see you. You are not the bombs, or the planes, or the boots of soldiers marching to war. You are the glass left half empty. You are the meal that went uneaten. You're an instrument unplayed, a memory of what once was. You are death. You are the space between things.
I remember reading this for the first time and thinking, what a revelation. What a statement to bring focus and clarity to Braque's work. This incident involving the death of this woman, an event barely recognized in the career of Picasso, becomes a fundamental but hidden driver of Braque's artistic career. It serves to crystallize his artistic philosophy and also his political one in the context of World War II and occupied France. It's really difficult to underplay the importance of this event in his artistic development. And that's really where my scholarship is driving and where I'd like to see more recognition come to in terms of Braque and his work.